Now here's a moral dilemma for you. My mate Brian brought me this MTK kit for me to build for him, something that happens on a regular basis. Long story. Now the spec that I'm normally given is basic detail, no weathering, and a paint scheme that's to his liking. As I've probably explained before, I like to model my things within the realms of reasonability. Brian just doesn't care. Now, if you'd seen some of the contraptions that we've built together over the years, you'd understand. This being a case in point, it's a Hornby Class 25 body cab, the back end of a Lima 117 DMU, and the chassis wheelset is off of a Hornby Pug. The point being, I suppose, I know it's going to be wrong, but it's not mine. It's Brian's railway and his. Enough waffling, let's crack on. As you can see, it's the standard text-based instructions with a few exploded diagrams and a scale drawing. Now, knowing the age of this kit, and I'm quite surprised that all the pieces are still there and the instructions are still included. Now, going against my normal practice, I'm starting this one with the body shell, and that's principally marking out for the roof vents and anything else that needs drilling out. After that, I then cleaned up the ends with a file and a little bit of emery cloth, making sure that it all fitted up nicely. The ends are white metal, and I super glued them to the aluminium body shell and then held in place with some cable ties. I then reinforced that glue joint with some araldite, or whatever it's called these days. Using the same 2-part epoxy glue, the roof ventilators were put in place and glued up. This kit being at least 20 years old, over its time, although probably being boxed most of it, would have collected an awful lot of dirt, grit, grease and any sort of other particulates not particularly suited to being painted. Therefore I gave it a nice long soapy bath in the kitchen sink before the first of many trips to the paint shop. Having not done an aluminium kit before, I was a bit sceptical about putting Halford's grey primer on it. We'll see how that turns out later. Halford's grey primer dries really quickly, so it was only a matter of 5 minutes before I could put the second coat on and then leave it to dry. And while it was drying, I thought it'd be a good opportunity to sort out the floor, chassis and internals. The supplied floor is a piece of bent up sheet metal, aluminium, and seemed to be quite thin, bent and not very sturdy, so I opted to make my own chassis out of laminated 80 thou plasticard. And on the top, with the aid of the drawing, I marked out the positions of the internal walls separating the 2 saloon ends, the guards compartment, toilet and kitchen facilities. And then for the underframe, using the etched parts and assorted other pieces of white metal supplied. Now, a friend once told me that under every piece of tarnished rusty metal there's a shiny piece waiting to get out, and all it needs is a piece of emery cloth to set it free. I'll just say again, my spec was basic detail, so that's all it got, only the parts that were supplied. And that'll be side truss rods, battery boxes, vacuum cylinders, dynamo and bogie pivot centres. And once the glue had cured, it was back to the paint shop for another coat of Halford's grey primer. The spray rattle can is quite harsh compared to the airbrush, and it's quite difficult to get into all the nooks and crannies, where it's quite easy with the airbrush. I suppose it's like comparing a pea shooter and a blunderbuss. Anyway, the following day it was dry enough to then go in with some not black. Revel number 9. Staying in the paint booth, we'll turn our attention back to the body, and before we start painting I'm going to stuff it full of tissue paper, well, blue roll. I can't imagine where that's come from. Brian requested that I paint this in maroon. Now I wasn't sure what maroon to use, whether that be LMS maroon or BR maroon. I decided to go for BR maroon. It's probably something the purists are going to wince at, and when they see what happens later on they'll be spitting feathers, no doubt. I started off by doing nice thin light coats and then gradually building up the colour. I think I ended up doing about 5 coats in the end. Sometimes work does help, because I then spent 3 days away from home working, which gave this maroon paint time to cure off. Well, enough for me to mask up, ready to paint the roof, which was done in Railmatch roof grey. Again, using nice light coats, building up the colour gently, making sure all of the little bits underneath the roof vents get covered. Again, waiting a couple of days until the paint was hard enough for it to be masked off, ready to paint the front ends, which might be a little bit controversial because I can't see any evidence of any of them in BR maroon and yellow ends. But then, this isn't my vehicle. With yellow being my nemesis colour, I've reverted to what I've learnt and been taught is to paint matte white and then, before it's dried, the yellow on top. And this one has turned out pretty good. And then, one of the most pleasurable parts of painting, taking all the masking off. Now you'd think that the title of these vehicles, Inspection Saloon, might give a hint to what their main purpose is. But in my experience, that's just a falsehood and a code word for management jolly. And that would apply to all companies that had them. Well, all companies did have them. Western, Southern, Midland, Eastern and British Railways. And if they weren't for a management jolly, why would they incorporate a kitchen into one of the compartments? And they're also quite an elusive vehicle to spot or observe. That's probably because they tended to spend most of their time residing in carriage sidings or engineers sidings waiting for use, which would be only very occasional. They'd be used in one of 2 ways, either singularly with a locomotive propelling or hauling, or attached to the front or rear of a normal passenger train, depending of course on who was travelling in it and where it was going. And now for one of the biggest cheats I've ever done, and that is marking out the doors. At first I did consider scribing them out with a razor saw, but then I decided no, the best way to do this would be to just pencil them on. Referring back to my original spec, which was basic detail, I think this has worked out very well. So they don't get rubbed out, I'm going to protect them along with the transfers that we've put on with 2 or 3 coats of satin varnish. Glazing will finish the body off nicely, and with that I'm going to use another cheat that I've borrowed from the aircraft modelers, and that's to insert the glazing with PVA glue because it dries clear. And if at any stage in the future you want to take it out and do other modifications, it's relatively easy to unstick, debond. Given this kit's age and the condition that it was given to me in, I'm not entirely sure that all the pieces were included, and those that were, I suspect, weren't originally designed for this kit, the bogies being a case in point. Only my suspicions, but then Judging by the way that these brass bearing cups have been supplied, I might be mistaken. It's a while since I've seen them supplied like that. I think that sticky tape has lost all its sticky as well. The bogies supplied to me seem very simple in construction, but that didn't mean to say it was easy, and I could have benefited from having 3 hands. Once they were trued up, wheels gauged and coupling supplied, they were ready to put onto the chassis, and then the chassis married up with the body. I managed to do this one quite well and got friction fit for the body and the chassis, which is something that I quite like. Although this wasn't a super detailed, high quality kit of modern times, I did quite enjoy doing it for its retro appeal. It was only finished a couple of hours and Brian come to pick it up. I was hoping for him to send me a video of it going round his railway, but alas, that hasn't happened, so I'm left with a few shots of the finished model. I'm working on about 4 different videos at the moment, so hopefully I'll have another one out very soon. In the meantime, thanks for watching. See you next time.